If you've ever been on the 15 freeway between Los Angeles and Las Vegas, you will have looked around yourself somewhere in the middle of the high desert, and you will have seen Joshua trees, yucca bushes, and millions of acres of dirt. Here, the difference between Barstow and Victorville is 20 miles of creosote. Not like the rest of Southern California, where a little green sign with a name, population, and elevation marks the difference between Ontario and Rancho Cucamonga. I grew up here in Victorville with my siblings, and we spent our childhoods playing in mud and skateboarding in empty aqueducts and poking around the Mojave River. Our river is unique because it flows northward and inland, but also for the majority of its length, it flows underground. So the only way that you know there's a river there is this pale stretch of empty sand where a river should be. Now, for a kid who read books and watched movies about beautiful places and roaring water and thick ivy, I thought of Riverside as this boring, lifeless valley in the middle of nowhere. So when I went to college, I was going to go someplace happening, someplace beautiful, someplace with some history. So I went to Riverside. And when I first got here, to be fair, compared to Victorville, it was alive. There were so many places to shop, so much history, so much culture, so many trees, so much grass. And the Santa Ana River was just a trickle, but at least it was above ground. And my first winter here, I got exactly what I wanted. I got the rain, and I got the fog, and the hills turned green, and it was beautiful. And then something awful happened. The seasons changed, and the air got hotter, and the hills caught on fire and turned black. I started to think that I was cursed because I left the desert, and I came down to Riverside, and when I got there, it died. And I could feel that I didn't belong either. I could understand that and admit it because the people knew that I didn't belong. They could see the desert dust on my skin, and they could hear the heat in my voice. They could smell a desert rat. And for a writer, a feeling of alienation is healthy. It's helpful. But it can start to eat away at your confidence. So I started to believe that there was some major invisible component lacking in my work. So I applied to a number of MFA programs in order to improve my craft. And thankfully, I got into the program at UC Riverside. And something strange happened when I did. Every time I met a writer who was from some place that had exciting things happening or was very beautiful, they were automatically an expert on writing to me, solely based on where they came from. I mean, they weren't like me. They wrote the good stuff, not like the kid from Victorville who lives in a place where you have to drill hundreds of feet into the ground to pull up water to wash your tercel and mix your Kool-Aid. I didn't even know what beauty was. So when it came time for me to write my thesis, which is a novel and a film adaptation of that novel, I decided to put it someplace really beautiful, the central coast of California, where the fog rolls over the Manzanitas and the Buckeyes lean over the Pacific waters. But every time I wrote a sentence, it felt like somebody else had written it. Sure, I'd done my research. I've been to those places. I'm a good writer. But it felt like lying when I put it down on paper. So I thought I was cursed again. I thought that my prose was destined to be just as arid and lifeless as the place that I came from. So I mustered my courage. I said, if Riverside isn't it, I'm going to move to someplace even more beautiful, to San Francisco for a summer, to San Diego for another. And as soon as I can belong there and not in Victorville, then my prose will start to match that more beautiful landscape. But it didn't happen. So I started devouring all this advice from Susan Straight and from Tom Lutz and from Stu Krieger and from my cohort, and my novel and screenplay adaptation started to spiral out of control. No longer was it a focused effort at telling a story. It was a hodgepodge of other people's suggestions. No longer was it a novel or a screenplay, but it was a collection of my own insecurities because I didn't have the confidence to hold on to anything that reminded me that I'm from Victorville and they're not, and I don't belong here. So before I despaired and threw the whole thing away, I decided to give it one more shot. And I remembered something that Tom Lutz said to me in class, and he said it to everybody. He said, at a certain point when you've fixed everything that's wrong with your writing and still something stinks, you have to admit to yourself that what is wrong with your writing is what's wrong with you. Those are hard words to swallow for a writer, but I had to admit it. And I knew that what was wrong with me had something to do with Victorville. And I didn't know exactly what it was, but I knew that the only way to get to the bottom of it was to write about it. So I decided to strip everything off the novel, take it out of the Central Coast, and move it to a place that I belonged, the desert. So I started to do some research, and I looked at some pictures, and I interviewed some people, and I went back to my childhood, and I found there this book called Just So Stories by Rudyard Kipling. And it was a book that my parents read to me a lot when I was a kid. And my favorite story out of it was how the leopard got his spots. And in this story, it takes place at the beginning of time when the world was so new and all, when all the animals were the color of sand, and they all lived in the high desert. It's my kind of story. So the zebra was getting really tired of being eaten for breakfast, so he decided to move to the wilderness and change his skin to stripes so that he could hide in the shadows, so that the Ethiopian and the leopard couldn't find him and eat him. But the Ethiopian and the leopard are smart. They moved to the forest too, and they changed their skin. The Ethiopian turned his skin black and used the extra color on his fingers to give the leopard spots. That's how the leopard got his spots, and that's how the predators got their breakfast again. And I thought about this as an adult, and I said, this is my story. I'm the zebra. I left the high desert to some more beautiful place, thinking that if I changed my skin and belonged in this place, then I would fix what was wrong with my writing. But the leopard was there to remind me that even if I did change my skin, it would only last for so long before he changed his skin too and found me there. So I decided to make my story an exploration of the desert. And it was about that time that I realized that the writers that I most appreciate are those that have the deepest connection with where they are from. Flannery O'Connor, with her love of the South and its inhabitants' unique ability to see the infinite in the ordinary. Kurt Vonnegut was born in Indiana and he left, but he would forever be a Hoosier in the lines of his novels. Ingmar Bergman tried to move to Hollywood, but he couldn't stand to be away from Sweden, this place that imbued his films with such quiet majesty. Derek Walcott's best poetry is that which encapsulates his place like objects caught in amber. And Susan Straight dedicated her novel Between Heaven and Here to my city, my hometown, all those who left and all those who stayed. And I always saw my hometown as my disadvantage. And it was only through writing that I realized how wrong I was. When I looked at it before, I saw dirt and heat and wind and a dry riverbed. But when I wrote about it, and I got to see it a little closer, I saw a place where settlers and natives built their homes on the banks of the once mighty Mojave. A place where Mechanwitz wrote Citizen Kane on Verde Ranch, a place of pride and education since their foundation, a bastion for local businesses, a place full of swimming pools and markets and festivals and travelers and laughing and eating and dancing and the same look of accomplishment that we have all seen on the faces of those acrobats that built the skyline of New York City, I saw on the faces of those men and women who were responsible for making Victorville the gateway to the high desert. And all of this happened long before I was born there and started complaining. Who the hell did I think I was to be embarrassed of Victorville? My lack of confidence in my writing came from my lack of confidence in my place. When I denied that anything good could come from the desert, I was denying myself the ability to write anything worth reading. There are towns and cities all across America full of people like me growing up between places that are more exciting or more beautiful, between the cities of angels and the cities of sin. But those people there have worked hard to make those places their homes, to appreciate the unique beauty that they have to offer. Just like me in Victorville, because I know now that in the black tarpaulin of a winter night, you can see every star that has ever burnt if you look hard enough. Where at the end of a tortuous day, the sun melts like a creamsicle on the mountains. And I've left, but I will always be a desert rat. They say, write what you know, and that's where I've started. They say, love the one you're with. And I love the desert. And even though that river runs underground, that vacant stretch of pale sand will always be a reminder to me that no matter how hot it gets and no matter how hard that wind blows, that river will always flow upward invisibly. It flows in me. Thank you.